Today we are going to read the last chapter in part 2. Part 2 is called A Jar of Pickles and a Pinch of Justice. The last chapter is called Gray Elephants and Five Fools, and they are in the book Mangoes, Mischief, and Tales of Friendship, Stories from India by Chitra Soundar, illustrated by Uma Krishnaswamy, and published by Candlewick Press. Last chapter, Gray Elephants and Five Fools. That would be chapter 8 of the whole book. Gray Elephants and Five Fools. Suku's Aunt Chandra was a washerwoman. While she worked, she sang songs about the forest and the trees, the rivers and the bees. People in the village often stopped outside her house to listen. Like all washerwomen, she had a donkey. The donkey carried her load to and fro from the river and sang with her whenever it pleased. But of course the donkey's braying was not sweet like Chandra's voice. Like any other donkey's, its braying was loud and harsh. One evening, Suku saw his Aunt Chandra in the market. "Hello, Aunt Chandra," said Suku. "How are you today?" Same old," said Chandra. "Every day I get into a fight with the potter next door." "Why?" asked Suku. "The potter gets upset about everything I do. You beat your clothes too loudly, he says. Your donkey brays too loudly. Your singing is horrible." "But you sing beautifully," said Suku. "That man must have no taste." "Mark my words, nephew," said Chandra. "One day that potter is going to bring lots of trouble and drop it on my doorstep." "I hope that doesn't happen," said Suku, "but if it does, I'll be there to help you." One day the potter was working on a vase for a rich man. It was a special order worth a lot of money. The potter had spent hours preparing the clay and setting it up on his potter's wheel. He didn't want anything to go wrong. The clay was poised on the wheel as it began to spin. Slowly, the vase began to take shape in the potter's deft hands. Just when he was curving his fingers to shape the neck of the vase, he heard, "Eeyaw, eeyaw." The potter was so startled that he let go of the vase. Now it lay splattered on the ground in a big lump. He would have to start all over again. The potter was enraged at the donkey and at the washerwoman who had allowed the donkey to sing. "No one should encourage donkeys to sing," he mumbled. "Enough is enough. I'm going to get rid of that woman and her donkey once and for all." That night he lay awake plotting an evil plan. Early the next morning the potter stood in line to meet King Bhima. "What can I do for you?" asked the king. "I have not come to ask for help, your majesty," said the potter. "I have come to help you." The king was astonished. How could this man possibly help him? Was he a spy, a wise man with advice, or an astrologer with a prediction for the forthcoming year? "Do tell me," said King Bhima. "I'm intrigued." "I'm a potter, your majesty," said the man. "I saw Airavata, the celestial elephant that belongs to India, the goddess of thunder, in my dreams." "Oh, belongs to Indra, the goddess of thunder, in my dreams." "I hear that's a good omen," said the king, still unsure while the man was in his court. "Yes, your majesty," said the potter, "but I wondered why that dream came to me. That's when I realized it wasn't for me. I don't have any elephants. The gods were sending a message to you through me." "And what would that message be?" asked the king. "Even though your royal elephants are tall and strong," said the potter, "they are still as gray as the monsoon clouds." The king wasn't sure if the man was insane or genuinely trying to help. He decided to listen to him. After all, that's why he kept the doors to his court open. "What should I do?" asked King Bhima. "I know someone who can wash your elephants and turn them as white as Airavata," said the potter. "Really?" said the king. "Who is that?" "My neighbor, the washerwoman Chandra," said the potter. "She could turn even the grayest of clothes white. She would be perfect for the job." The king was amused. Who was this miracle woman who could turn his elephants from gray to white? Was the potter trying to get a job at the palace for his neighbor? "Bring the washerwoman to my court tomorrow," ordered the king. When the news spread about the potter's dream and his suggestion to the king, everyone was afraid for Chandra. How could she change the color of an elephant? Soon the rumors reached Chandra, too. She was worried. She had known that the day would come when the potter would bring her harm. What was she going to do? Maybe Suku could help, she thought. Suku visited the king often and was friends with the prince. Maybe Suku could tell the king about the potter's ploy. Chandra went to Suku's house and explained the situation. Tell me how to get out of this, she begged. Don't worry, Aunt Chandra, said Suku. I will come up with something. Suku didn't waste a moment. He set off to the palace to see Prince Vira. I need your help, my friend, said Suku. He told Vira about the tiff between the potter and his aunt and how it reached the palace. I don't like this at all, said Vira. It is one thing to have a disagreement with a neighbor. Everyone does. We have seen so many cases of that, agreed Suku. He recalled the neighbors fighting about wells and water, mango pickles and precious gems. But to bring to the king and make him party to their feud, said Prince Vira, well, that's crossing the line. And she is my aunt, said Suku. I need her to help her. I'm sure father will be fair, said Vira. We should teach a potter a lesson, though. Suku agreed. They couldn't just complain about the potter to the king. They needed a plan. Can you show me how your aunt washes clothes? Said Vira. Like everyone else, I suppose, said Suku. I have never washed my own clothes, said Vira, so show me. Suku took Vira back to his aunt's house in the village. She had bundles of dirty clothing to wash. I soak the clothes in big pots like this, explained Chandra. Then I beat them on a stone. After that, I wash them in the river and I dry them on the riverbank. Vira watched with fascination. I should learn about all the trades in my kingdom, he thought. Now, every time he put on clean clothes, he would appreciate the work that went into washing them. What if you had to wash a big blanket? Asked Vira. I would need a bigger pot, said Chandra. I would get one from the market. The potter next door has a shop there. Vira smiled. I think I know how to outwit the potter, he said. But you must do what I tell you. Then Vira explained his plan to Suku and Chandra. That night, Chandra slept peacefully. She knew the prince's idea would save her from the wrath of the king and perhaps even stop the potter from bothering her again. Early the next morning, the king summoned the washerwoman to the court. Prince Vira and Suku were there too. I order you to wash my elephants and turn them white, just like Arivata, said the celestial elephant in the skies, said King Bhima. He was sure the woman would refuse. Who would do such a task? The washerwoman didn't seem perturbed at all. She smiled at the king and said, Of course, your majesty. May I see your elephants first? The king was taken aback. Perhaps we should invite the potter, too, to come with us to the stable, said Prince Vira. After all, it was his dream. The king agreed, and the potter was summoned. When he arrived, he joined the king and his entourage as they walked to the stables with Chandra, Vira, and Suku. Chandra entered the stables. She walked around the first elephant. She took out a string and measured the elephant. She touched its back and its trunk, and then she repeated the same process with the second elephant. She pursed her lips, nodded, and muttered to herself. The king watched with amusement as she considered the task. Suku and Vira were watching the potter. He looked far more afraid than the washerwoman. Finally, after a few minutes of inspection, Chandra stepped out of the stables. She looked at the king solemnly and said, I think I can wash these elephants and turn them white, your majesty. What? The king exclaimed in surprise. But I need a few supplies before I can get to work. What do you need? Asked Vira. I need 2 pots to soak each of these elephants in, she said. The pots need to be big and strong, enough to hold the elephants overnight. The king caught on quickly. He looked at Vira and Suku, who were grinning from ear to ear. The king turned to the potter and said, Dear man, your idea was wonderful. Now I am relying on you to make the biggest, strongest pots to soak my elephants in. The potter gasped. His mouth fell open in shock. But, he stammered. Come with the pots, said the king, as soon as you can. The potter ran from the stables back to his house. He packed his bags and left the village, lest the king should send soldiers asking for the pots. Chandra left the palace happy. She had managed to thwart the potter's ploy. So tell me, boy, said the king, did the washerwoman have any help? Suku nodded and pointed to Vera. She is my aunt, your majesty, he said, and I'm grateful to Vera for helping me. I knew it, said the king. Well done. That night, the village celebrated the potter's defeat and Chandra's victory with a big feast. And the guests of honor were Prince Vera and his best friend Suku. A few days later, a poet was invited to the king's court. It was customary for visiting poets to recite some verses in honor of the king and his kingdom. The king would then reward the poet with money and perhaps even a title. The poet spent the whole morning reciting poems about the king's generosity. The king rewarded him with a lavish lunch with himself and his courtiers. In the afternoon, the poet recited poems about how the kingdom was filled with clever people. He read out many verses exalting the wisdom of not just the king and his court, but every citizen in the kingdom. Prince Vera and Suku listened to the last few verses from the balcony upstairs. The poet is very talented, said Suku. He exaggerates, said Prince Vera. He is just trying to impress father. It's not so easy to impress you, said Suku. That evening, after the poet had set off on his journey with a cart full of gifts, the king was in a good mood. I agree with the poet, said the king. Our kingdom is filled with wise men and women. We have no fools. Prince Vera nudged Suku. I told you, he whispered, the poet has given father a high horse. What horse? Asked King Bhima, catching the last word in Vera's sentence. You shouldn't believe everything the poet says, father, said Vera. He used the word wise just to rhyme with nice. I'm not that naive, said the king. I sincerely believe that I don't have any fools in my kingdom. What if I prove you wrong, said Vera. Suku and I will make our way through the village and find 5 fools. We'll meet you at the palace gardens in an hour. The king smiled. You're bored, I think, he said. I challenge you to find a single fool, let alone 5. Vera and Suku set off toward the village. On their way, they met a woman who was searching for something in the river. What are you looking for? Asked Suku. My gold ring, said the woman. When did you lose it? Asked Suku. This afternoon when I was working. Where were you working? Asked Suku. In the mangrove, said the woman. Why are you looking in the river if you lost the ring in the mangrove? Said Prince Vera. You're so silly, said the woman. She had not recognized the prince. The mangrove is dark now, but the river is well lit. There's a better chance of finding the ring here. Come with me, said the prince. We'll get someone to find your ring for you tomorrow. So the woman followed the boys as they walked to the village. On their way, they met a farmer on a donkey with a bundle of firewood on his head. Dear man, said Prince Vera, walking alongside the donkey, why don't you place the firewood on the donkey's back? The man was aghast at the suggestion. Can't you see my donkey is tired? Asked the man, how can I burden it with the firewood too? Prince Vera invited the man to join them. Suku offered to carry the firewood until they reached the palace. As the party of 4 made their way through the village, they saw a man lying on his back in the street. His hands were in the air and he was calling out to people to help him get up. What is he doing? Wondered Prince Vera. Suku placed the bundle of firewood on the ground and asked the man about his predicament. Can't you see my hands are far apart? Answered the man. How can I get up without moving them? Why are you holding them apart? Asked Suku. Because that's the length of fabric my wife asked me to bring home from the shops. Why are you on the ground then? Asked Prince Vera. Surely the fabric shop is not down there. I slipped on a banana peel, said the man. I can't get up without moving my hands, And if I move my hands, I'll forget the